a lot of the principles that are used today in environmental justice work were created by environmentalists of color back in the 1980s and the 1990s. And in fact, in 1991, there was a summit that was held in Washington, D.C., that was attended by Native Americans, African Americans, Asians, Pacific Islanders, just people of color from different parts of the world. And they came up with 17 principles that are still used today in environmental justice work. Back in the 1980s, I want to say like 1987, there were protests from African Americans in communities that were being bombarded by hazardous waste. Indigenous communities, Native Americans have always protested around issues of the environmental justice issues. The dumping grounds for most, actually, I sent you something that has the 17 principles, but I also sent you some links that you can share with anyone who's on the call. That there's actually a map that was developed in 1987 that showed basically environmental injustice around this country, and it was all communities of color. Now you have to remember that, first of all, the reason it seems like people of color aren't involved is because when they do their environmental protests, they don't always get on the news. That's number one. Number two is sometimes people living in these communities, because they're poor communities, and they're usually targeted because a lot of them don't have access to the justice system. So it's not like the community can hire lawyers and help and work with them. It's usually volunteer lawyers that will come in and work with them pro bono and that kind of thing. So these things are dumped in their environment because they're usually poor. Some of them hold several different jobs to be able to make ends meet. So they don't have time to go out and protest. So, so there are a lot of, different things, but the African-American community, the indigenous communities, the Latinx community, all these communities have been talking about environmental issues before it was sexy, before it was popular. Dr. Martin Luther King talked about environmental issues way back when. So that's a perception, that's not a reality.